let's start with your big scoop, and then we can get into some other topics.
So Skip Bayless's time at FS1 is coming to an end this summer. He was there for 8 years, but the last year, frankly, wasn't very good. He had great chemistry with Shannon Sharp, but him and Shannon had a couple interpersonal blow-ups in the final year of their relationship. So Shannon left the show about a year ago, and I think let's put a pin in that and talk about what Shannon accomplished after Undisputed later. But let's just focus on Skip for now. So they took about 2 months off to revamp the show. Then they added a group of like rotating co-hosts like Keyshawn Johnson, Richard Sherman, Michael Irvin, Rachel Nichols, Paul Pierce, Lil Wayne. And the chemistry never really picked up. Part of that was that I think some of these people didn't fit into the format of a Skip Bayless debate show in the way that Shannon played the role, and before that, Stephen A. Smith played the role. And part of it was that it was like, they used to have a moderator on that show. They had Carrie Champion between Skip and Stephen A. on ESPN. Yeah. And then with Shannon Sharp, they had several of them. They had Jenny Taft. They had Joy Taylor. They had Jen Hale. And so the moderator would introduce the topic. Skip would usually go first, and it would drive, Shannon and Stephen. Well, how can you say that? No, LeBron is good. And then like Skip would respond to the response. But in this version of it, Skip would introduce the news, and then he might not be the person to chime in with his opinion until third or fourth. And, this was his vehicle. And so it just was a really wonky format. He didn't gel with, honestly, Paul Pierce he gelled with, but the rest of them, I don't think he did. And it didn't really work. And so he was there for 8 years, and he is going to be leaving later this summer. And I had been tracking that this might happen for a while, and I finally got it nailed down. Like, okay, it's done. It's happening. And I broke it, and I was very happy to get that one.
Well, congratulations on the news break. I think the bigger question, if we go to the analysis from my perspective, is why did Skip Bayless fall after rising? It would have been easy to have this broader, it would have been expected if he had gone to FS1 after ESPN and flopped. I think there was this conventional wisdom that that's what happens, that you leave the ESPN mothership, you cease to be relevant, and you fall off the face of the earth. And that's sort of the change. It changed with Dan Patrick. It changed with Colin Cowherd.
Changed with Rich Eisen.
It changed with Rich Eisen, and it changed with Skip Bayless. He was initially very successful when he came aboard and was a beachhead for that channel. I wonder why he lost the juice. There's a Shannon Sharp component to this. Shannon Sharp is a bit of a disruptor in media, it seems. I think that he's part of the story as to why Stephen A. Smith has been so grumpy over there at ESPN. He's seen the success of Shannon Sharp and wants his own sorts of Shannon-esque projects. So there's this component that he had great chemistry with Shannon, and then that ended. But in theory, this guy was a very successful broadcaster. I guess I'm going to throw this theory at you, and you can give me your theories. I don't know if there's a lot to Skip beyond the TV guy. And I wonder if for whatever reason we're in an era where there just needs to be more, where Colin is doing a bunch of YouTube and you get more of a sense of him and his personality behind the scenes. And the same is so obviously of Shannon Sharp. And these people who they're media moguls in a way in sports media, they're not just the guy who shows up and does the pure TV product. Skip seems like he is so myopically focused on that role that It's just not enough. And then you combine it with a sense that maybe his opinions are outlandish and maybe they're contrived and maybe he's just known for holding on to this LeBron hate that didn't even make sense after a while. And it's not balanced at all by, well, here's Skip the guy, you know him, you understand the context of how he thinks. That's my theory.
So, I want to go back to the part about, people getting lost leaving ESPN, because that's happened with some people. You remember Michelle Beadle left ESPN for a show on NBC. Nobody watched it. And then she returned to ESPN. That was kind of the warning that people held over talents to prevent them from leaving for a while. And so, Dan Le Batard on ESPN's airwaves said, hey, Colin, you're going to get lost. Skip, you're going to get lost. But luckily for Dan, he was wrong, because then he left ESPN and he didn't get lost either. And Bill Simmons is another one who has very much thrived in the digital space outside of ESPN. And I think that's what the great disruptor was. You used that word with Shannon, but all of a sudden, if you have a big social media following, media is obsessed with X, but if you're on X and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube's the big one. YouTube really makes these big personality talents portable for distribution in a way that you could never replicate before the last decade. And so I think Skip and Shannon, they would get in the 200,000s in terms of people watching. And there was a time where they were creeping up on First Take. First Take was still handily beating them, but they might only be beating them by 30% one day. And now all of a sudden, Shannon leaves and he takes an entire football stadium or two of people away from Undisputed and brings them to First Take. There are not a lot of singular talents in sports media that could have that type of impact that Shannon did by leaving. I mean, he went and he interviewed Cat Williams, and it was the biggest interview that YouTube has ever had. He has firmly cemented himself in that upper echelon of stars. And so I do think losing him was a huge factor in this. I think if he had a moderator and a one-on-one debate opponent, let's say they had gotten Chad Ochocinco, who does a podcast with Shannon, and made him every day, you're going to be debating Skip, I think that would have done better than what they ended up doing. So, it's not to say that Skip is blameless in all of this drop, but I think that there would have been a way to decline less.